The morning fog was still lifting off the water when I heard the rumble. At first, I thought it was thunder echoing off the lake's surface, but as I stepped out of my cabin with coffee in hand, the truth shattered the calm like a slap to the face. Bulldozers. 3 of them, orange and loud, pushing their way through the gravel road that led to my Lake Cabina road I'd graded and maintained myself for over a decade. My name was Jack Remington, and I'd lived off the edge of this lake long before the HOA bought the plot up the hill and started playing Property King. I dropped the mug to the porch. It shattered, but I barely noticed. From behind the bulldozers, an SUV pulled up. Glossy black. Out stepped a woman in a stiff blazer, with a clipboard in one hand and a smug smile on her face. Karen Worthington, president of the Highland Shores HOA. "Morning, Jack," she called, waving like she hadn't just sent 3 tons of steel to destroy my road. "We're doing some trail renovations. Can't have private access roads cutting through HOA-managed green space, you understand." I stepped off the porch slowly, hands calm, but my jaw clenched. "That's not your land," I said flatly. She lifted the clipboard. "It is now, or it will be. The HOA just passed a motion to annex this section of land for shared community use. You'll still have some access, of course be kayak or canoe maybe." I stared at her. "The only dock on this lake is on my property. That road's how I haul supplies, fuel and my boat. You block it, you block your own access to the water." She blinked, then smirked. "Oh, Jack, you think you're the only one with legal tricks?" She waved her hand. The bulldozers fired up again, crunching forward. They were going to flatten the road, box me in and make me walk miles of wooded shoreline just to get to my own truck. But she didn't know what I had done last summer. She didn't know that I had spent 6 months navigating county maps, state permits, and a few very private purchases that would undo everything the HOA just attempted. She didn't know that I now owned the shore and all of it, except for their little hilltop enclave. And she sure didn't know I had video recordings of her bribing a zoning official 3 months ago. But I wasn't going to start with that. No. I was going to let her bury herself first. The call had come from my neighbor Tom, who lived on the opposite side of the lake, just outside the HOA lines. "Jack, you better come check this out," he said, voice hushed. "They've got surveyors out at the access trail near your cabin, marking trees. Looks like they plan to block it." I was 2 hours away in town, picking up a new generator. My old one had fried a coil during last week's storm. I dropped the box off with the hardware guy and bolted back to the lake. I knew Karen had been eyeing the lake access road for months. Ever since the HOA tried to run power cables down the hill to light up their so-called lake club, they realized the only way to get heavy machinery to the shore.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Lake club. They realized the only way to get heavy machinery to the shoreline was through my road. And I had denied them. Politely. Firmly. Legally. That had bruised her ego. She'd been looking for a way to get revenge ever since. And now, apparently, she thought she'd found it. As the bulldozers rolled toward the base of my road, I raised my phone and hit record. "Karen Worthington," I said aloud, loud enough to catch the audio clearly. "You're trespassing and attempting to alter private land without a court order or permit. I suggest you call off your goons." She glanced at my phone and smiled like I was an idiot. "We've got permits, Jack." "Oh, I'll bet you do," I said. "Mind if I get a copy?" She frowned. I stepped closer. "You've made a huge mistake." She laughed and turned to one of the HOA board members standing behind her. "He's bluffing. He always does dice acts like he's got cards, but he's just plain scared." But I wasn't scared. Not even close. Because last month, I filed a quiet title action and had the boundary lines legally resurveyed. Not only was the road mine, but thanks to a clerical error and some clever footwork, the HOA's community dock had been built 6 inches into my parcel line. which meant I could shut it down. Legally. Permanently. And I planned to. But first, I needed proof of destruction and a full record of the intimidation. So I let her bulldozers scrape up the gravel. I let them rip out the sign I had posted. I let Karen pose like she had finally won. Because the trap had already been set. By 8 p.m., the bulldozers were gone. The road was chewed up, with fresh logs laid across it like a blockade. Karen had her HOA boys install a cheap chain across the trailhead with a sign that read, "HOA property, no access without permit." I laughed when I saw it. Because the next morning, I walked half a mile around the shoreline, launched my skiff, motored up to the community dock, and installed my new sign. Private dock trespassers will be prosecuted. Deed filed, county verified. It took less than an hour before my phone rang. Karen. "You can't do that!" she screeched. "That's our dock." "No," I replied. "It's mine now. You built 6 inches into my property. Your dock is now an illegal structure. And guess what?" I paused for dramatic effect. "I've already filed for its removal." The first thing I did after I launched the skiff was call my attorney, Daniel Hart, the kind of guy who could tear apart a property dispute blindfolded. He was halfway through his morning coffee when I explained what the HOA had just done. I could practically hear him slam his mug down. "They brought bulldozers to block your land access?" he repeated, incredulous. "3 of them," I said, guiding the skiff smoothly past the tree-lined bend. "And they dumped a dead pine across the path like it was Normandy." Daniel laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that promised consequences. "Send me the drone footage. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, you do not leave that cabin unattended. You know how Karen operates." I did. She wasn't just the president of the HOA, she treated the neighborhood like her private kingdom. Her family didn't even live here full-time, yet she chaired every meeting, had backdoor deals with the local contractors, and handed out fines like they were party favors. The deeper issue was envy. My lakefront property was the largest privately owned tract in the area. The HOA had tried to pressure me into joining their association a few years back. I declined. I wasn't obligated to join. My deed and zoning documents made that clear. But that didn't stop Karen from trying every petty tactic under the sun to force compliance building inspections, harassment over water runoff, even accusing me of violating fictional noise ordinances. What they really wanted was access. My dock committed, insured, and built to exact state specifications was the only legal...
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Insured and built to exact state specifications was the only legal water entry point for miles that didn't fall under HOA control. During summer months, residents had to trailer their boats to the public ramp a full 45 minutes away. My setup was enviable and completely off-limits to them. That made Karen furious. By the time I rounded the bend and pulled up to the small marina across the lake, one of the few places with public Wi-Fi, I had sent Daniel all the drone footage, time-stamped logs of previous threats from the HOA kin, and a scan of my land deed. He called back 15 minutes later. I just got off the phone with the county road supervisor. Not only was the HOA unauthorized to alter the trail, but that path technically belongs to a fire evacuation route the state funded 3 years ago. Blocking it is a felony. That stopped me cold. They blocked an emergency route? Daniel's tone was crisp and deadly now. Yes. And if we act fast, we can get the sheriff and the county code enforcement out there today. I gunned the skiff's motor and looped back around the lake, adrenaline roaring through my veins. Back at the cabin, I landed the boat, tied off the cleats, and walked up the wooden steps to grab the printed copies of everything Daniel might need. Ownership maps, old HOA letters, GPS coordinates from the browse. Fire department's emergency plan. Not 30 minutes later, I heard another engine. This one wasn't a bulldozer. It was a black and white county cruiser, tires crunching as it approached from the lakeside trail I had cut myself years ago. which snaked up behind the cabin and met the ridge road. The deputy stepped out, nodded at me, and asked to see the footage. While I explained everything, how they had used heavy equipment to block a critical access point, ignored prior boundary disputes, and acted without permit, the deputy's expression grew stony. He radioed it in. "Get the county supervisor out here," he said into the mic. "We've got what looks like an HOA blocking a registered fire lane." He turned to me after a pause. "You know this could get them sued into next week, right?" I nodded. "That's the plan." An hour later, 2 more vehicles arrived, one from the county, the other an environmental safety inspector. They took photos, measured the illegal earthwork, documented the tree that had been felled across the bend. A red tag was slapped onto the bulldozer with the logo on it. And then Karen showed up. She must have gotten word through her radio network of HOA busybodies. Her Lexus whipped into the upper trail parking spot like she owned the forest. She stepped out in oversized sunglasses, a clipboard in hand, and that smug expression she always wore when she thought she was winning. "What's going on here?" she barked. "This is HOA-managed land, and we have a right to regulate access for safety." "This isn't your land," said the county officer sharply. "It's part of an emergency egress route. You're in violation of state code and federal safety regulations. You could have endangered lives." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She turned red. "We were just trying to protect the neighborhood from unauthorized access," she said weakly. The officer ignored her. "We'll be issuing citations today, but if the damage isn't undone by end of business, we'll escalate to formal charges." Karen sputtered. Formal charges? "We were acting as stewards of community safety." "You brought in bulldozers," I snapped, "to block a legally zoned fire lane and to retaliate against a property owner who's not even under your jurisdiction." Karen pointed a finger at me, like I was the criminal. "You've always been the problem. You think you're better than everyone living off-grid. Bypassing the HOA, I read the law," I said calmly. "You just invent it." The county official handed her a citation. Then another. Then one more. Her hand trembled. By the time they left, Karen was still standing, their clipboard limp at her side, her power fantasy collapsing under the weight of legal reality. I walked past her, stepped back into my cabin, poured myself a coffee, and opened the back door to the sound of birds and lapping water. The trail would be cleared. But the war? That had just begun. The first light of dawn filtered through the pines, casting long golden beams over the still surface of the lake. I stood at the end of my dock, coffee steaming in my hand, watching as the morning fog curled above the water like ghosts reluctant to leave. This dock, my dock, was the last piece of access to the lake for miles, the final thread they couldn't sever, and now the sharpest weapon I had left. The bulldozers were still parked just beyond the tree line, silent and heavy like sleeping beasts. The HOA had left them there after the confrontation, some half-hearted attempt to prove they still held the upper hand. But I'd already made my calls. I wasn't the kind of man who left things unsettled. I'd spent the last week documenting, filing, and preparing. The moment they blocked my trail, they kicked off a chain reaction they were too arrogant to predict. 3 days ago, a county assessor met me at the property line. The trail they bulldozed over didn't just lead to my cabin, it crossed 3 parcels of private land the HOA had assumed I didn't own. Turns out, I owned all 3, purchased quietly through a shell company years earlier when I first caught wind of their territorial antics. That same day, I filed a land use violation report with the county. The assessor's jaw practically hit the pine needles when I handed him the original survey and deeds, clearly marked and notarized, showing every square inch of the land their machines were parked on belonged to me. The next day, I had the County Environmental Board on site. Turns out, in their haste to punish me, the HOA had disrupted a protected drainage area that fed into the lake's natural ecosystem. Their bulldozers had torn through an erosion buffer zone without a permit. That violation alone carried a $40,000 fine per day.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
That violation alone carried a $40,000 fine per day until restoration could be completed. And that was just the warm-up. I met with my lawyer, Lyle, the kind of guy who wore suits like armor and could slice through red tape with a smile. We prepared a lawsuit for unlawful interference with property access, malicious destruction, and environmental damages. The number? High enough to make their president choke on her mid-morning mimosa. The next time I saw Karen, the HOA president, was during an emergency meeting I wasn't invited to, but made sure was recorded. My contacts in the county had already heard enough and issued a temporary cease and desist on any further allied operations near my property. The room was pure chaos. Karen's carefully curated control was unraveling. By the end of the week, contractors hired by the county, not the HOA, were forced to bring in equipment to clean up the damage. They had to remove their own bulldozers, restore the trail, and install erosion control fencing under supervision. I stood on my dock and watched it all happen like a silent general observing the retreat of a defeated army. But I wasn't done yet. You see, when they blocked access to my cabin, they didn't just mess with my peace, they disrupted the only path emergency services had to a nearby lakeside subdivision that technically relied on my access point for rapid champra. Response. Fire, ambulance, even search and rescue all blocked. That little detail had been buried in an old easement agreement, long forgotten except by me. Once I filed a complaint with the State Emergency Services Board, a state-level investigation opened within 24 hours. The cherry on top? Their insurance provider cancelled their policy once they realized the HOA had acted without board-wide approval in direct violation of their own charter. Every member of the board was now personally liable. Karen went from smug queen to sweating defendant in less than 10 days. I decided to make my next move personal, but legal. I held a lakeside event, a charity fishing tournament for local veterans. I issued permits, coordinated food trucks, and even got a local country band to play. Hundreds attended, including the mayor and several state legislators. Every attendee used my dock, parked on my land, and enjoyed my cabbing. Karen and her cronies sat on the opposite shoreline, red-faced and seething, watching their last gasp of relevance evaporate like morning mist. By the time the lawsuits were formally served, the HOA was crumbling. 3 board members resigned. Karen's name was all over the local paper, not as a hero, but as a tyrant who cost the neighborhood hundreds of thousands in fines, repairs, and now legal settlements. And me? I reopened the trail with a new gate, one that read, "Private access by invitation only." Just beneath it, in smaller print, "Courtesy of the man who owns the only dock for miles." I took a deep breath as the band struck its first chord behind me. The crowd cheered. The sun finally broke free from the trees. It was a perfect day on the lake, and it was mine again. The county zoning commissioner called me the next morning, voice hushed but direct, as if he were afraid someone might be listening on his end. He said, "I don't know what kind of hornet's nest you stirred up, but I just got a call from the HOA's lawyer trying to claim that your dock blocks emergency lake access. That's absurd, and you and I both know it." I thanked him and asked him to forward everything to my legal team. He replied, "Already done. Also, you'll want to know someone filed for an injunction to stop your dock repairs. We denied it." That was when I knew Karen and her inner circle were getting desperate. By noon, I had engineers, contractors, and 2 environmental surveyors walking the shoreline, checking the dock's structural integrity and taking photos of every inch. My new plan wasn't just to protect my property, I was preparing to expand the dock, legally. I owned the only deeded launch access.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Legally. I owned the only deeded launch access in the entire region. Expanding it would give me even more leverage. But Karen wasn't done throwing punches. That evening, 2 bulldozers returned not to block the cabin, but to destroy the trail leading down to the water. They ripped up the path, pulled out trees, and dumped boulders across the route. The crew moved fast, working under portable floodlights, like they were trying to get it done before anyone could catch them. But they forgot one thing. I had installed motion-activated surveillance drones weeks earlier. Everything was caught in 4K from the license plates on the construction vehicles to the HOA president giving hand signals on the hill. By dawn, I filed an emergency motion in court. It included environmental destruction, property damage, harassment, and a formal request for injunctive relief. My attorneys included drone footage, satellite overlays, and even a heat map showing bulldozer activity across protected soil. It didn't take long. When we walked into court 3 days later, Karen wore a bright red blazer, still smug. Her lawyer tried to explain that the trail might have been public access and unfortunately became damaged during a road safety project. But when the judge saw the video of Karen pointing and laughing while trees were uprooted, her face fell. "I hereby grant immediate injunctive relief," the judge said. "Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney for criminal review of property destruction and conspiracy to defraud." Karen's lawyer asked for a recess. He was denied. As we left, my attorney whispered, "They're done." I wasn't finished, though. Over the next few weeks, I met with the Planning Board, the county's Historical Preservation Office, and the state's Recreation Authority. I filed an application to have my dock certified as a protected historical launch backed by old photographs and survey maps. If approved, it would make my shoreline untouchable by the HOA permanently. At the same time, word spread through the neighborhood. More residents began questioning the HOA's motives. One neighbor, a retired Navy captain, showed me a letter from Karen threatening him over a weathered flagpole. Another couple admitted they'd been fined for loud canoe paddling. The HOA's stranglehold was slipping. And then, in the middle of their unraveling, the State Attorney General launched an inquiry. I didn't need to be told who had forwarded the complaint. I had. 3 months later, Karen stood trial not just for the destruction of my trail, but for a pattern of abuse stretching back a decade. False citations, forged vote counts, financial manipulation. She wasn't just facing Thanet, she was facing jail time. As for the lake, my dock was officially designated a protected structure, and I rebuilt the trail with gravel and timber steps this time, adding solar lights and a gate at the top. No one from the HOA ever walked down it again.